this whole approach by Biden, I think, is to try and draw clear water between himself and Trump, and just to remind voters, what sort of guy they're being very tempted to put back in the White House come November.
Now, Joe Biden is spending a fortune, $50 million, on an ad blitz. Alistair, tell us exactly what this is.
Yeah, this is sort of the moment, really, if you like, the gloves come off for Joe Biden. This $50 million ad campaign, which is running from now until the end of the month. Of course, it's only 10 days until we have the first debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, the first presidential debate, and it really is an attack on Trump. It talks about the 34 felony convictions he received in a court in New York last month. It talks about other cases in which he's been found liable for sexual assault and financial fraud. The ad is titled "Character Matters," and I think it's very clearly designed to draw a distinction between Biden on the one hand, someone who in the past has earned the moniker of Honest Joe, against Donald Trump, who I think we can say now, given his criminal record, is legally dishonest. And I think that's where Biden feels he has, and Biden's campaign feel they have an edge on Trump, and something that they can exploit by reminding voters of Trump's recent problems.
Yeah, I mean, do any voters honestly not know about what you've very elegantly called Trump's recent problems?
No, and when voters are asked about their view of Trump in light of these convictions, we fall on familiar narratives. There are those that would never vote for Donald Trump, and there are those for whom the convictions have only strengthened their resolve to get behind him. The polls have hardly moved at all since Trump's convictions now about a month ago. And in actual fact, in many polls, he's edged slightly ahead. I think that the probability of Trump winning the election has slightly increased since that happened. So, but I think it's Biden's attempt to really hammer home this message, and where he's got problems on the economy, on the war in the Middle East, on the border, where he's also trying to do things and trying to persuade voters on top of it. This is something that he doesn't have a problem with. Although, of course, last week we saw his son being convicted of three crimes himself.
Yeah, and presumably that isn't referenced in these ads. It's like that never happened. But maybe actually that doesn't matter,
Right.
because all that really proves is that absolutely, as Mr. Biden would want, no one is above the law.
That's right. And one of the things that you hear from the Republicans so often is that the Biden administration, the Democrats, are quote unquote trying to weaponize the Justice Department. That argument sort of falls apart a little bit when the president's son has also been convicted of felonies too. So, yeah, this whole approach by Biden, I think, is to try and draw clear water between himself and Trump, and just to remind voters. What sort of guy they're being very tempted to put back in the White House come November.
Can we just have a brief word about Biden's current serving Surgeon General and this health
Hmm.
warning that he wants to
Yeah.
put out about social media? What is this exactly?
Well, this is the Surgeon General, the US's top health official, a guy called Vivek Murthy, very well thought of, very well respected. He has issued an opinion this morning saying that social media should carry health warnings like tobacco or alcohol. And specifically, he says that social media sites, he doesn't name any, but we all know the big ones that perhaps he's referring to, carry a specific mental health threat for teenagers. And as such, they should carry a warning, and parents should be advised of the damage they can do. Now, his opinion is just that, it's an opinion. In order for this to actually happen, for you to turn your Twitter account on and you'd be sort of warned with you'd be presented with a warning about your mental health, it would have to be passed in Congress. An act of Congress would have to be passed, and that's a long way off. And there'll be great arguments about that. And there's probably certainly not time between now and the presidential election. But it is interesting that it's something that a figure very close to the president, very close to the White House, very close to the administration, thinks is a necessary move.
Yeah, that really is. Yeah, it probably won't surprise very many people listening, I don't suppose. Thank you very much. That's Alistair Dawber in Washington.
Surely no one can have a bad word to say about Milwaukee, famously home to the Fonz and the rest of the Happy Days gang. Apart from Donald Trump, who has called it a horrible city, which is a little bit awkward because that's where he'll be formally named as Republican presidential candidate at the party's national convention in just a month's time. The comments revealed by Punchbowl News met with a slightly curious set of reactions when they were revealed. Representative Glenn Grothman said Trump had been talking about poor performance in elections. His colleague Scott Fitzgerald said the comments were about election integrity. Congressman Derek Van Orden said they were about the crime rate. And Brian Steele declared, "I was in the room. President Trump did not say this. There is no better place than Wisconsin in July." He apparently later admitted that Trump had been talking about specific issues in Milwaukee. Well, let's talk now to Craig Gilbert, the former DC bureau chief and national political reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. He's now a law professor at Marquette University. A very good afternoon from us, Professor. How are people in Milwaukee reacting to this?
Well, first I should say have to correct you. I'm not a professor. I'm a fellow at the Marquette Law School.
Take professor. You're professor
no,
to
please
us.
please don't ask me any legal questions. Yeah, it's gotten a lot of attention, and as you put it, it is a little bit awkward. I mean, you might think that because Milwaukee's an overwhelmingly Democratic city, that it doesn't really matter what Trump says about the city of Milwaukee, but this is a city where he got almost 50,000 votes in 2020, which is more votes than he got in any other individual community in Wisconsin 4 years ago. So, Democrats have been winning the city of Milwaukee by a margin of roughly 4-1, but it really, really, really matters what that margin is and what the size of the turnout is in Milwaukee. This is like a source of perennial consternation among Milwaukee Democrats. So in that sense, it is relevant, especially when you think that Republicans have ambitions to do better in urban areas and do better, particularly among Black and Hispanic voters, which considerable portion of the Milwaukee electorate.
All of the denials and the excuses given by people around Donald Trump, have they made the situation worse?
Well, we never know how much what Donald Trump says matters in the end, because of course, as you know, a lot of voters discount it. It doesn't really matter to his hardcore supporters, but there are a dwindling number of still important swing voters in Wisconsin. I think it's bad PR. I think if you think that having a convention, that it makes sense to have a convention for a political party in a city like Milwaukee because it is in a battleground state. If you think there's any potential payoff to having a convention in a battleground state, then I think you have to also think that controversies like this also matter on the margins. And, I think probably the longer it stays in the news, the less helpful it is to the Trump campaign.
Sure. In your experience, what are these conventions actually like?
Well, this is interesting because we haven't had a really, quote, normal convention in 8 years because Milwaukee was supposed to host the Democratic convention 4 years ago, and it became a virtually entirely remote event. And the Republican convention in Florida was, pretty remote too. So it's going to be interesting to see whether this convention looks any different, feels any different from the 2016 or 2012 conventions. Obviously, a big wild card is protests. And, in both sites, I mean, certainly the war in Gaza is expected to generate a lot of protests in Chicago at the Democratic convention. But there's no reason not to expect a lot of protests at the Republican convention. There's been fights over where the protesters can protest and how close to the convention site they can get. So other than that, conventions are big social gatherings, and they're big, they're like any other professional convention. They're places for the faithful and the committed to kind of gather, and they're interesting because they tell us something about the nature of the political party, and in this case, a Republican Party that has changed under Donald Trump.
So if Donald Trump calls Milwaukee a horrible city, what adjective would you use?
lovable. I mean, Milwaukee is a great city. It's a beautiful city. It's got a beautiful lakefront. It has lots of problems. I mean, we shouldn't paper over that. It has a pretty pronounced history of racial inequality, like a lot of other cities. But there's good stories and bad stories in the city of Milwaukee, like other cities. It's got a really interesting, really fascinating political history that we don't have time to get into, involving socialists and multiple parties and protests and everything else. But it matters, and it's gonna play a big role in the 2024 election, however you cut it.